If the camera hadn't been recording, no one at the station would have believed what they were about to watch. The video opened in a pale green haze, the kind you only see on old home security camera footage at night. The timestamp blinked in the corner. 2:17 a.m. No sound, except a faint hum. Electric heat fighting a Colorado winter. The image showed the inside of a small police service home on the edge of town. Quiet enough that even the silence felt tired. Most people would have clicked away. It wasn't dramatic. No movement. No alarms. Just a tired man in uniform lowering himself into a chair near a desk. His shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the night had finally caught up with him. Officer Jack Miller didn't look like a hero in that frame. He looked like a man running on caffeine, obligation, and too little sleep. In the corner of the room sat a crib. Inside it, barely visible under a thin blanket, was his newborn daughter. Her chest rose and fell in small, steady motions. She slept the way babies do, unaware of the world's dangers, trusting that someone else was awake for her. Someone was. On the floor beside the crib lay Rex. The German shepherd didn't move. His body was stretched out, disciplined and still. The posture of a working police dog, even off duty. His eyes, dark and alert, never left the crib. Not once. He didn't sleep. He didn't shift. He watched. That was all. The technician scrubbed forward, then back again, frowning. "You see that?" he murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "He hasn't looked away." Jack stood behind him, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had seen this scene 100 times in real life. Rex near the crib. Rex watching. Rex making Jack's stomach knot with a fear he hated admitting out loud. To Jack, it looked wrong. A K-9 trained for pursuit, detection, and confrontation had no business being that close to a baby. Every instinct Jack had learned through years of law enforcement training told him one mistake was all it would take. One bad second. One misread signal. He'd argued about it before, more than once. The technician glanced back at him. "You want me to keep rolling?" Jack hesitated. "Yeah," he said. "Just keep it running." The video jumped back to earlier that night. Jack appeared again, this time pacing the room, boots heavy on the floor. His radio crackled with low static. He glanced toward the crib, then at Rex, his expression tight. "You don't take your eyes off her," Jack muttered under his breath. More accusation than request. Rex didn't respond. He never did with words. His ears twitched once, barely noticeable, then settled again. His gaze stayed fixed. The footage showed Jack turning away, heading toward the door that led back to the station. He stopped with his hand on the knob, looking over his shoulder one last time. For a moment, something like doubt crossed his face. Then he left. The door closed softly behind him. The room returned to stillness. No music swelled. No warning appeared on the screen. The camera simply watched. The way cameras do, without opinion, without fear, without the assumptions that humans bring with them. The baby stirred, making a small sound in her sleep. Rex's head lifted a fraction of an inch. His breathing changed, slow but deliberate. Jack, standing in the control room now, felt his chest tighten as he watched himself walk away on the screen. "This is where I started thinking about pulling him from the unit," Jack said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. I thought I was being responsible." The technician didn't answer. The camera kept recording. Nothing happened for several long minutes. Just the soft rhythm of a sleeping child, a working dog standing guard, and a house that seemed too quiet for what it was holding. Then, at the edge of the frame, something shifted. Not enough for a casual eye to notice. But Rex noticed. His ears rose slowly. His body tensed. Not with aggression, but with focus. Jack leaned forward. That's nothing," he said, even as his voice lost confidence. The technician didn't blink. "Let's just keep watching." The camera did exactly that. And somewhere in that quiet, unremarkable moment, captured by a cheap lens and a blinking red light, the truth was already beginning to surface. "And that," Jack said quietly, his eyes still locked on the screen, "is where everything started to go wrong." The footage faded, but the feeling didn't. It stayed in his chest, like a weight he couldn't shake. Jack Miller hadn't always been this tired, this sharp-edged. There was a time when he believed in the job with a kind of clean certainty. He'd grown up in a working-class town outside Denver, the kind where people waved to patrol cars and meant it. Becoming a police officer wasn't about power for him. It was about order, about keeping bad things from reaching people who didn't deserve them. For most of his career, Jack had been good at that. Until the night everything shifted. It had been a routine call, suspected burglary, empty warehouse, lights flickering. Jack and his partner went in by the book. Clear the entrance. Check the corners. Rex at his side, focused, flawless, as always. Then something went wrong. A sound misread. A shadow where there shouldn't have been one. His partner went down hard, leg broken, screaming in the dark. Jack never forgot the sound. Internal review cleared him. The department said it was no one's fault. Accidents happened. But clearance didn't quiet the nights. It didn't stop Jack from replaying every second, asking himself what he'd missed. And when his partner was reassigned, and Jack was moved to overnight duty, temporarily, he understood what that really meant. That's how he ended up in the service house on the edge of town. That's how exhaustion became his constant companion. Then the baby came. His daughter arrived earlier than expected. Tiny, fragile, wrapped in wires and hospital blankets that smelled like disinfectant and fear. Jack stood beside the incubator feeling useless for the first time in his life. There were no procedures for this, no commands, no training manual, just a heartbeat he was terrified of losing. Sleep became a rumor. Emily tried to rest during the day between hospital shifts, but Jack paced the house at night, every sound setting his nerves on fire. The heater clicked on and off. The pipes groaned. The old house settled in the cold, and Rex watched. That, more than anything, unraveled Jack. The dog stayed close to the crib, closer than Jack liked. Too still, too focused. Jack had worked with canines long enough to recognize intensity, and what he saw scared him. He didn't see guardianship. He saw potential risk, a loaded weapon left unattended. "You can't be emotional about this," he told Emily one morning, voice low but firm. "This isn't a family pet. He's trained for confrontation." Emily, still in her scrubs, looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "And you're trained for violence, too," she said gently. "But I trust you near our child." Jack had no answer for that. Instead, he leaned harder into rules. Distance. Control. He started sleeping less, drinking more coffee, checking the crib every 10 minutes when he was home. The idea of Rex near the baby followed him everywhere. On patrol, at roll call, in the empty hours before dawn. The department psychologist noticed. So did the K-9 supervisor. "You're stretched thin, Jack," the supervisor said one night. Not unkindly. "Maybe Rex needs a break." That sentence lodged in Jack's mind and refused to leave. A break, a reassignment, a solution. By the time Jack called in the evaluation request, he'd convinced himself he was doing the right thing, protecting his daughter, protecting everyone, even protecting Rex from a mistake that couldn't be undone. Back in the control room, the technician cleared his throat softly. "You want to see the rest?" Jack didn't answer right away. On the screen, the frozen image showed Rex beside the crib. Head slightly raised now, ears alert, not aggressive, not relaxed either. Watching. Jack swallowed. "Yeah," he said finally. "Show me everything." The technician hit play, and as the footage resumed, Jack had no idea that what he was about to witness would dismantle everything he thought he knew. About dogs, about fear, and about what it truly meant to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves, and about the people who see danger where there's only devotion. That thought lingered as the video kept playing. The screen showed the house again, unchanged. Same pale green glow. Same quiet room, but now, knowing what Jack knew, knowing how close he was to making a final call about Rex, the stillness felt heavier, like the air before a storm. Emily Miller had always trusted her instincts. It was part of being a nurse. You learn to notice small things, changes in breathing, the way a patient's eyes moved, the silence that came before a monitor alarm. It wasn't something they taught in textbooks. You either had it, or you didn't. And from the moment she brought their daughter home, Emily felt something settle into place whenever Rex was nearby. She noticed things Jack didn't. How Rex positioned himself so his body was always between the crib and the rest of the room. How his ears flicked at every unfamiliar sound, then relaxed when it passed. How he never crowded the baby, never touched her, unless she stirred and cried. And even then, only with his presence. At 3 in the morning, when exhaustion pressed down on Emily's chest like a weight, she'd sit in the rocking chair and whisper to Rex without realizing it. "She's breathing funny tonight," she'd murmur. Rex would lift his head. "She's okay," Emily would add a moment later, reassured by the rhythm returning to the tiny chest in the crib. Jack hated those moments, not because they were wrong, but because they made him feel like an outsider in his own home. Emily trusted something he couldn't control, couldn't command, couldn't put into a report. And worse, Rex responded to her in a way that felt intentional, like he understood. "You're projecting," Jack snapped one night after another argument, his voice low so the baby wouldn't wake. "You want him to be something he's not." Emily didn't raise her voice. She never did. That was what unsettled Jack the most. "I'm not projecting," she said quietly. "I'm observing." Jack turned away, rubbing his face. Observation is what gets people hurt. Emily stood there for a long moment. Then she asked the question Jack had been avoiding. "Have you ever seen him act aggressively toward her?" Jack didn't answer. "Have you ever seen him bare his teeth, growl, even step too close?" Silence. "No," Jack finally said. "But that doesn't mean—" "It means something," Emily interrupted gently. "You just don't want to hear it." Back on the footage, Emily appeared briefly, placing the baby into the crib before heading to bed. She paused, watching Rex, her hand resting on the crib rail. "Good night, buddy," she whispered. Rex's tail thumped once against the floor. The technician paused the video. "You noticed that?" he asked Jack. Jack frowned. "Notice what?" "He responds to her tone," the technician said. "Not commands. Tone." Jack didn't like where that was going. Emily had tried one last time before Jack made the call to K9 Command. She'd stood in the kitchen, still wearing her hospital badge, her hair pulled back tight, exhaustion lining her face. "Just give me one night," she said. "Let the camera run. Let's stop arguing and look at the facts." Jack scoffed. "You think a camera's going to tell us what a trained officer can't see?" "I think it might show us what fear keeps hiding," she replied. That word again. Fear. Jack heard accusation in it. He bristled. "I'm not afraid," he said. "I'm responsible." Emily nodded, tears welling but not falling. "Then prove it," she said. "Watch. Don't decide before you see." That was the moment Jack agreed. Not because he trusted Rex, but because he trusted evidence. On the screen, Rex shifted closer to the crib as the baby stirred, his body lowered, non-threatening, protective. He didn't touch her. He didn't lick. He didn't whine. He watched. Jack felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "This isn't guarding," he muttered. "This is fixation." The technician didn't argue. Instead, he let the footage run. Because sometimes the truth doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits, quiet, patient, unnoticed, until the exact moment when no one can look away anymore. And somewhere deep inside Jack, beneath years of training and buried guilt, a question he didn't want to ask began to surface. What if he was wrong? The video kept rolling, and with it came a deeper layer Jack hadn't wanted to face. Rex hadn't always been this quiet, this still. Before the house, before the baby, before the nights filled with doubt. Rex had been one of the sharpest K9s in the unit. He'd tracked missing hikers through snowstorms, sniffed out explosives hidden where no human eye could ever find them. He moved with confidence, precision, a controlled intensity that commanders loved. But Rex had a history Jack rarely talked about. 2 years earlier, during a joint training exercise, a mechanical lift malfunctioned inside a storage facility. The machine jerked unexpectedly, its metal arm snapping down just as Rex moved in. His hind leg had been caught for only a few seconds, but seconds were enough. The whine Rex let out that day had cut straight through Jack, sharper than gunfire. They shut the machine down, freed him, rushed him to the vet. Physically, he healed. Something else didn't. After that, Rex reacted to certain sounds. Grinding metal, low mechanical hums, sudden shifts in pitch, sounds that reminded him of the trap he couldn't escape. The K9 unit documented it, labeled it manageable sensitivity, and moved on. Jack never did. Now, watching the footage, he noticed things he'd ignored before. The way Rex's ears flicked when the heater clicked on, how his muscles tightened, not aggressively, but defensively, like someone bracing for impact. "This is what scared me," Jack said quietly in the control room. "He's on edge." The technician leaned back, folding his arms. "Or he's alert." Jack shook his head. Alert dogs don't stare like that. On screen, Rex shifted slightly as the baby stirred. Not closer, not farther, just enough to stay aligned with the crib. His breathing slowed when hers did. Jack clenched his jaw. He remembered the night he'd finally said the words out loud. "I don't trust him anymore." Emily had frozen in the doorway, the baby in her arms. The room had gone so quiet Jack could hear the refrigerator hum. "You don't trust him," Emily said slowly. "Or you don't trust yourself." Jack snapped back instantly. "Don't do that." "I'm serious," she said. "You've been blaming Rex for everything you're afraid of." That hurt more than Jack wanted to admit. He'd never blamed his partner for getting hurt. Never blamed the department for sidelining him. Never blamed the system that kept him awake night after night. But blaming a dog, one that couldn't argue back, felt safer. Cleaner. The video showed Rex lifting his head fully now. His ears stood tall. His gaze shifted. Not to the baby, but toward the far end of the house. Jack leaned closer. "Pause it," he said. The technician did. Rex's posture was unmistakable to anyone who'd worked K9s long enough. This wasn't fixation. This wasn't anxiety. This was assessment. "He's not looking at her," the technician said slowly. He's listening. Jack swallowed. Back then, Jack hadn't seen it. All he saw was risk, a powerful animal, a troubled past, a fragile child inches away. Every training scenario screamed danger. Every case study warned him what could happen if instinct went wrong. So he started building a case in his own mind. He watched Rex too closely, misinterpreted every still moment as tension, every silence as restraint. Confirmation bias did the rest. By the time Jack called the K-9 supervisor, his voice had been steady. "I want a re-evaluation," he'd said. "He's not safe around my child." Those words echoed in his head now, louder than the low hum of the footage. On the screen, Rex remained motionless, eyes tracking something beyond the camera's view. "What's he hearing?" Jack asked. "Time 1500 mums." The technician didn't answer right away. Instead, he hit play. And for the first time, Jack noticed a sound beneath the silence, so faint it barely registered. A subtle metallic scrape. Almost nothing. Rex's body tensed. Jack's chest tightened. He thought of every moment he'd dismissed Rex's behavior as instability, every label he'd attached without proof, every fear he'd mistaken for logic. The dog hadn't changed. Jack had. The video continued, moving steadily toward a moment Jack wasn't ready for yet, but one that was already set in motion. And as Rex shifted his weight, placing himself just a little closer to the crib, Jack felt a cold realization settle in his gut. He hadn't been watching a dangerous dog. He'd been watching a protector, preparing for something no one else could hear. If you were in Jack's position, what would worry you most? 1. The dog's past. 2. Your own fear. Or 3. Trusting instinct over training. Comment 1, 2, or 3 below. Jack didn't sleep after watching that part of the footage. Even hours later, the image of Rex standing alert beside the crib stayed burned into his mind. Not aggressive, not restless. Waiting. It should have reassured him. Instead, it made everything worse. Because it cracked open a truth Jack had been trying to keep sealed shut. He was afraid. Not of Rex, not really, but of what would happen if he was wrong again. By dawn, the snow had started falling harder, thick flakes tapping against the windows of the service house, like quiet accusations. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, hands wrapped around a mug she'd forgotten to drink from. Jack watched her from across the room, rehearsing words he didn't want to say. "I called K-9 Command," he finally said. Emily didn't turn around. "When?" "Last night." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument they'd had before. "They're scheduling a full evaluation," Jack continued, forcing himself to stay calm, professional. "If Rex doesn't pass, he'll be reassigned. Maybe retired." Emily closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but only just. "So you already decided?" Jack shook his head. "No, I'm being responsible." She turned then, tears pooling but not falling. "You're being scared." That word landed hard. Jack stepped closer, Emily, this isn't about feelings. This is about child safety, about risk management. You work in healthcare. You know how fast things can go wrong. I also know patterns, she shot back, and Rex has shown nothing but control. Jack exhaled sharply. Control breaks. Instincts fail. I've seen it. Emily looked past him, toward the crib in the next room. So have I, she said quietly, with people. Jack had no answer. Later that night, after Emily left for an early shift at the Cumonton hospital, Jack stood alone in the living room, staring at Rex. The dog sat calmly, head slightly lowered, eyes following Jack's movements with quiet attention. You don't understand what you're putting me through, Jack said, rubbing his temples. You don't understand what's at stake. Rex didn't move. Jack grabbed his jacket, keys jangling louder than he intended. As he reached the door, something stopped him. Not a sound, a feeling. Guilt. He turned back. Fine, he muttered. One night. One last night. The decision felt cruel and merciful all at once. Jack set up the home security camera himself, adjusted the angle so the crib and most of the room were fully in frame. He tested the feed on his phone, making sure the timestamp was visible. Evidence mattered. If Rex truly was a danger, Jack needed proof. Real proof. Not fear. Not assumption. When Emily came home briefly to drop off supplies, Jack told her what he'd done. I left the camera running, he said, all night. Her eyes widened. You mean? I mean, if I'm right, Jack said firmly, we'll know. And if I'm wrong, his voice faltered, then I'll stop this. I promise. Emily studied him for a long moment, searching his face. Finally, she nodded. That's all I asked, she said quietly. The house felt different that night. The baby slept more restlessly, her small noises echoing through the rooms. Rex stayed closer than ever, positioning himself beside the crib with deliberate care. Jack watched for a few minutes before heading back to the station, his chest tight with unease. At the door, he paused. Rex, he said softly. The dog lifted his eyes. Don't make me regret this. Jack left without waiting for a response. Hours later, at the station, Jack sat alone in the dim control room. Paperwork spread out in front of him. He kept glancing at the live feed on his phone. Nothing happened. Minutes stretched into an hour. His shoulders relaxed slightly. See? He muttered. Nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, the audio feed picked up something else. A faint sound. Metal. Dragging softly against the floor. Jack leaned forward. On the screen, Rex's ears lifted slowly, and Jack felt the same cold realization he'd felt during the warehouse incident years ago. The moment when everything was about to change, and there was no stopping it. The control room was too quiet. Jack noticed it the same way officers notice danger, not with logic, but with a tightening somewhere behind the ribs. The low buzz of fluorescent lights. the distant hiss of the old coffee machine, and on his phone screen, the pale green glow of the security feed from the service house. 2:41 a.m. Nothing moved. The baby lay still in the crib. One small fist curled near her cheek. Rex rested on the floor beside her. His body stretched long, but not loose, like a soldier sleeping with one eye open. His chest rose and fell in a slow, measured rhythm. For a moment, Jack almost convinced himself this was what peace looked like. Almost. "See?" he murmured to no one. "Just a dog. Just a house." He turned back to his paperwork. Incident reports. Liability forms. The kind of documents that kept departments protected and people distant. This was his world. Clean lines, clear responsibility, no guesswork. Then the feed flickered. Not enough to trigger an alert. Just a brief shimmer in the corner of the frame, like the camera adjusting to something it hadn't expected. Jack's eyes snapped back to the screen. Rex hadn't moved, but his ears had. They lifted slowly, deliberately, the way they did when Rex caught a sound too faint for human hearing. His breathing changed, not faster, deeper. Jack leaned closer, heart thudding. "What did you hear, buddy?" he whispered, though Rex was miles away. The audio feed was useless at first. Just the low hum of the heater, the occasional creak of the house settling under the weight of snow. Jack told himself it was nothing. Houses made noise, old wiring shifted, pipes complained. But Rex didn't relax. He rose to a crouch, careful not to brush the crib. His body angled, not toward the baby, but toward the hallway that led to the rear of the house. Time 802, where the small maintenance room connected to the equipment shed. Jack swallowed hard. That area hadn't been used in months. Just old tools, backup generators, a portable electric lift the city had stored there after renovations downtown. Harmless, inactive, at least it was supposed to be. On the screen, Rex took one slow step forward, then stopped. His tail was still, his head lowered slightly. This wasn't aggression. Jack knew that now. This was calculation. "Okay," Jack muttered, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "Okay." The baby shifted, releasing a soft, breathy sound in her sleep. Rex froze instantly. He glanced back at the crib, reassessed, then repositioned himself. Closer, wider, his body forming a subtle barrier. Jack's pulse spiked. "That's not fixation," he said aloud, his voice tight. "That's placement." The silence stretched. Then came the sound. So faint, Jack almost missed it. A thin metallic scrape, like steel brushing concrete. Rex heard it immediately, his muscles locked, every line of his body taut with tension. The sound came again, longer this time, followed by a low mechanical hum. Jack stood up so fast his chair clattered backward. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." The feed showed the far hallway now, the edge of the maintenance door just visible. It shifted, barely. Creaking open under pressure, Jack couldn't see. Cold air spilled in, stirring dust along the floor. And then something rolled. Slow, unsteady, wrong. The portable electric lift emerged inch by inch, its wheels turning as if pulled by an invisible hand. A loose power cable dragged behind it, sparking once as it caught on the metal threshold. Time to 600 mems. Rex stepped forward immediately, not charging, not barking, blocking. Jack's mind raced. He remembered the training accident, the scream Rex had let out, the smell of hot metal and panic. This was the same sound, the same machine, the same threat. On screen, the lift rolled closer, its motor whining, uncontrolled. The baby stirred again, a soft cry bubbling up from her chest. Rex glanced back one last time. Jack felt something inside him break. "Please," he whispered to the screen. "Please don't run." Rex didn't. Instead, he lowered his body, planted his paws firmly against the floor, positioned himself squarely between the machine and the crib. His fur bristled, not with rage, but with effort. The lift surged forward another foot. The cable tightened. And in that suspended moment, caught between fear and instinct, memory and duty, Rex made a choice Jack hadn't believed was possible. The storm was no longer coming. It was already there. When danger appears silently, what matters most? 1. Quick reaction. 2. Past experience. Or 3. Protecting the most vulnerable first. Comment 1, 2, or 3 below. The sound grew louder. Not fast. Not sudden. Just steady enough to be wrong. Jack stood frozen in the control room, eyes locked on the screen. The portable electric lift rolled farther into view. Its small warning light flickered weakly, casting a dull amber glow against the wall. The motor whined like something struggling to wake up, dragging itself forward, without direction, without awareness. No alarm, no emergency signal, just motion. "That thing shouldn't even have power," Jack whispered, his throat dry. But the camera didn't care what should or shouldn't happen. It captured only what was real. On the screen, Rex shifted his stance. He didn't rush the machine. He didn't bark. Instead, he adjusted. Subtle, precise, angling his body so that if the lift surged, it would hit him first. Jack felt a surge of panic twist through his chest. "That's enough," he muttered, grabbing his phone. His fingers fumbled as he tried to call home, forgetting, for one frantic second, that no one was there to answer. Emily was on shift. The house was empty, except for a baby, and a dog Jack had nearly sent away. The baby stirred again, this time louder. A small cry cut through the night, sharp, fragile. The sound made Jack flinch. On the screen, Rex reacted instantly. He turned his head just enough to check the crib, then snapped his attention back to the threat. His ears flattened, his body lowered, his breath came out in a controlled huff. Jack recognized that posture now. It was the stance Rex took before breaching doors, before stepping into darkness, before facing something unpredictable. Only this time, Rex wasn't following a command. He was choosing. The lift rolled forward another few inches. The loose cable scraped along the floor, catching on the edge of a rug. Sparks jumped briefly. Bright. Dangerous. The machine jerked. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. "Move," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, move." Rex didn't move away. Instead, he stepped closer. The machine lurched again, momentum pulling it toward the crib. The baby's cry grew louder, her small body squirming beneath the blanket. Rex let out a low sound. Not a growl, not a bark. A warning, a vibration in his chest, meant to stop something that didn't understand language. The lift ignored him. That was the moment Jack realized the truth. This wasn't about obedience, or training, or fear. This was about priority. Rex surged forward. His shoulder slammed into the side of the lift. The impact rocked the machine, throwing it off balance. The wheels squealed in protest as it veered sideways, but the cable caught. The lift snapped back, swinging toward Rex instead. Jack shouted without realizing it. "Rex!" The dog yelped as the metal frame struck his leg. He stumbled, but he didn't retreat. He pushed again, harder this time. Teeth clamped onto a handle, shoving the machine away from the crib with everything he had. The cable tore free. The lift spun, slammed into the wall, and finally died with a hollow clang. Silence fell like a held breath. Rex collapsed onto the floor, chest heaving. He dragged himself back toward the crib, placed his body between the baby and the lifeless machine. His leg trembled. A dark stain spread beneath his fur. The baby cried once more, then quieted. Rex lifted his head just enough to look at her. His eyes softened. His breathing slowed, though pain etched every movement. Jack sank into his chair, shaking. On the screen, nothing moved anymore. No danger, no noise, just a wounded dog standing guard over a sleeping child. Jack pressed his hands to his face. "I was wrong," he whispered. "God help me. I was wrong." The camera continued to record. It caught Rex lowering himself carefully onto the floor, curling his body along the side of the crib, creating a wall where none had existed before. It caught him staying awake despite the pain, ears twitching at every sound, refusing to rest. It caught the truth Jack had nearly missed forever. If that camera hadn't been recording, no one would have believed what a police dog did that night. Least of all, Jack. Jack didn't realize he was holding his breath until his lungs burned. On the screen, Rex stayed where he was, curled beside the crib, his injured leg tucked awkwardly beneath him, his body forming a barrier no training manual had ever described. The machine lay silent against the wall. Defeated. Not by force, but by refusal. It would go no farther. It could not reach the child. The baby's cries softened into small, uneven breaths. Sleep crept back in, fragile but real. Rex didn't close his eyes. Jack's hands shook as he rewound the footage a few seconds, then played it again and again. He watched the moment where Rex could have run, the moment where fear had every right to win. It didn't. Instead, fear returned, older, sharper, heavier, demanding payment. The same fear that had trapped Rex years earlier in that warehouse. The same sound, the same metal, the same helplessness. Only this time, Rex didn't panic. He remembered. The camera caught the tremor in Rex's muscles after the impact. The way his jaw clenched. The way his ears flicked backward. Not in submission, but in pain. Jack saw the cost clearly now. Rex hadn't been fearless. He had been brave. God, Jack whispered, his voice breaking in the empty control room. He thought back to every time he'd mistaken that stillness for danger. Every time he'd looked at Rex and seen a problem instead of a partner. A liability instead of a protector. And worst of all, every time he'd stood between Rex and his own family, convinced he was doing the right thing. On the feed, Rex shifted slightly, adjusting his position to keep pressure off his leg. A small smear of blood darkened the carpet beneath him. Jack's stomach dropped. That wasn't superficial. That was real damage. Jack reached for his radio with shaking fingers, calling in an emergency unit to his own address. His voice, so steady in every other crisis, cracked now as he gave the location. My service house, he said. K9 injured. Infant present. Copy, came the response. Units en route. Jack stayed glued to the screen. Rex's head lifted suddenly. Jack stiffened. What now? But the machine didn't move. The house didn't change. The sound Rex reacted to was different. The baby stirred again. Her small hand slid through the bars of the crib, fingers searching in her sleep. She brushed against Rex's fur. Rex flinched, then relaxed. He turned his head slowly, carefully, until his nose hovered near the crib. He didn't lick. He didn't nudge. He simply breathed. Warm. Steady, and until the baby's hand stilled against him. Jack felt tears blur his vision. That moment, small, quiet, devastating, did more to undo him than the collision ever could. Rex rested his chin on the floor, eyes still open, ears still alert. He didn't sleep. He guarded. Jack leaned forward, palms pressed flat against the desk. This is why he stayed, he said softly, the realization landing fully for the first time. This is why he wouldn't leave. Rex hadn't been obsessed. He'd been assigned, not by command, not by training, by instinct. Minutes passed, then more. Rex's breathing grew shallow, strained by pain and exhaustion. But his focus never wavered. The camera recorded everything, every shift, every blink. every silent decision. If this had been a courtroom, Jack thought, the evidence would have been undeniable. If this had been a home security camera advertisement, it would have been called unbelievable. But this wasn't marketing. This was child safety, written in blood and instinct. Jack scrubbed his hands over his face. He thought of the evaluation request already logged in the system. The words potential risk burned in his mind. He had almost destroyed the one thing standing between his daughter and tragedy. The flashing lights of approaching patrol cars reflected faintly in the window on screen. Rex noticed them too. His ears twitched as help finally arrived. Only then, only when the danger was gone, did Rex allow himself to rest his head fully on the floor. Not asleep. Just waiting. Jack straightened, wiping his eyes. The man who stood up from that chair was not the same one who had sat down hours earlier. Fear had taken its payment. Now, it was Jack's turn. Jack was already moving before the dispatcher finished confirming the address. He didn't remember grabbing his coat. He didn't remember slamming the door behind him at the station. All he remembered was the image burned into his mind. Rex on the floor, bleeding, still guarding the crib as if nothing else mattered. Snow blurred the windshield as Jack drove faster than he should have. The patrol car's engine whined in protest. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking like a cop. He was thinking like a father who might already be too late. When Jack burst through the front door of the service house, the smell hit him first. Metal, burned wiring, and something sharper underneath. Fear. His boots slid slightly on the floor as he rushed toward the living room, his heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. "Emily!" he shouted, even though he knew she wasn't there. Then he saw them. The portable electric lift lay crooked against the wall. Its power cable snapped, the sparks long gone. The carpet beneath Rex was stained dark. Rex himself lay beside the crib, body curved protectively, eyes open despite the pain rippling through him with every breath. The baby cried softly. Jack dropped to his knees. "Oh, God. Rex." At the sound of Jack's voice, Rex's ears twitched. He lifted his head just enough to confirm what he already knew, that the baby was still safe. Only then did his body finally sag, exhaustion overtaking pure will. Jack's hands hovered uselessly for a moment before he touched Rex's shoulder. Gentle, reverent. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You stayed the whole time." The baby's cries grew louder, startled by the tension in the room. Jack forced himself to breathe, scooping her up carefully. Time 600. She was unharmed, warm, alive. Her tiny fingers clenched around his uniform, as if anchoring herself to him. Jack pressed his forehead to hers, tears blurring his vision. "I almost sent you away," he whispered, to Rex, to himself, to the empty house. "I almost didn't trust you." Rex let out a weak breath. His tail barely moved against the floor. Sirens approached outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the walls in harsh color. Paramedics and officers rushed in moments later. but Jack barely noticed them. All his attention stayed on Rex as they worked quickly, assessing the injury. "Fracture," one of them said quietly, but he held the weight. "That's what saved the kid." Those words landed harder than any reprimand Jack had ever received. Held the weight. Rex had taken the impact so the crib wouldn't have to. As they lifted Rex onto a stretcher, Jack followed, one hand resting on the dog's fur. "I'm here," he murmured. "I've got you now." Rex's eyes met his briefly. Steady, forgiving, unchanged. At the hospital later that night, Jack sat alone in the waiting room, still holding his daughter. Emily arrived breathless, her face drained of color when she saw the bandages, the officers, the tension etched into Jack's posture. "What happened?" she whispered. Jack looked up at her, eyes red. "He chose her," he said simply. "He chose her over his own fear." Emily covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. She knelt beside Rex's gurney, pressing her hand to his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack watched the scene unfold and felt something inside him collapse completely. The wall he'd built, between instinct and trust, between control and compassion. He understood now what the camera had shown him so clearly. This wasn't about risk assessment. This wasn't about K9 protocol. This was about a living being who understood protection better than he ever had. Later, as Rex was taken into surgery, Jack stepped into the hallway, leaning heavily against the wall. The evaluation request still sat in the system, waiting to be finalized. Jack pulled out his phone. With shaking fingers, he deleted it. In its place, he typed something else. Commendation paperwork, a formal incident report, and a note to K9 Command that said only this: Rex acted beyond training. He acted as family. Jack slid down onto a bench, head in his hands. He had reached the lowest point, not when the machine moved, but when he realized how close he'd come to betraying the one being who had never betrayed him. And now, there was no going back. Morning came slowly, as if the world itself needed time to recover. Jack sat alone in the hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above him. His daughter slept against his chest, wrapped in a borrowed blanket that smelled faintly of antiseptic and fabric softener. Every now and then her tiny body twitched, a reminder that she was alive, that she was here. Across the hall, behind a closed door, Rex lay in surgery. The veterinarian had been calm, professional, careful with words. Fracture to the leg, deep tissue damage, painful, but survivable. Months of recovery, physical therapy, no guarantees about returning to full K9 duty. Jack nodded through it all, but his mind kept drifting back to the footage, to the moment Rex could have fled, and didn't. Emily arrived just before sunrise, her hair still damp from a rushed shower at the hospital. She didn't speak at first. She simply sat beside Jack, resting her head on his shoulder. For a long time, neither of them said a word. Finally, Emily whispered, "If that camera hadn't been running." Jack swallowed. We'd never know how close we came, or how wrong he'd been. Later that morning, a senior officer from the department arrived, tablet in hand. "We reviewed the security footage," he said quietly. "All of it." Jack braced himself. "The city's risk management team will want a full report," the officer continued. "Liability, equipment failure, property damage. There'll be talk of home insurance coverage, workplace responsibility, maybe even pet insurance considerations for Rex's care." Jack nodded numbly. "But," the officer added, pausing, "there's something else." He turned the tablet so Jack could see. The paused frame showed Rex Gustav, body angled in front of the crib, eyes locked forward, unmoving. "That dog didn't malfunction," the officer said. "He made a decision." Word spread faster than Jack expected. By midday, people from the K9 unit stopped by quietly. No jokes, no backslapping, just nods, respect. One of them placed a folded department blanket on the chair beside Jack. "Rex saved a life," the man said simply. Emily watched Jack's face as those words landed. She saw the guilt still there, heavy, unresolved, but beneath it, something new. Humility, gratitude, resolve. That afternoon, Jack stood alone at the hospital window, looking out over the parking lot, dusted with snow. He thought about the things he'd believed all his life. That control was safety, that rules prevented tragedy, that love had to be measured and managed. He thought about life insurance policies, about the paperwork adults filled out to prepare for worst-case scenarios. He thought about how none of those documents could have stopped what nearly happened in that house. Only Rex had. When the veterinarian finally emerged, Jack felt his knees weaken. "He's stable," she said. "He's in pain, but he's alert. He keeps lifting his head like he's listening for something." Jack let out a shaky breath. "Can I see him?" Rex lay on a padded mat, leg wrapped carefully, eyes half open. When Jack entered, those eyes focused instantly. Jack knelt. "I should have trusted you," he said quietly. "I won't make that mistake again." Rex didn't wag his tail. He didn't whine. He simply rested his head back down, reassured. Later, alone again, Jack filled out the official report. Time 200 ms. He described the equipment failure, the timeline, the injuries. Then, in the final section, actions taken, he stopped. His fingers hovered over the keys. He typed slowly, deliberately. K9 Rex placed himself between a mechanical hazard and an infant, absorbing impact to prevent harm. Action taken without command, motivated by protection. Jack read it twice, then once more. For the first time in a long while, The words felt honest. That night, as Jack and Emily prepared to leave the hospital, Jack glanced back at Rex's room one last time. The dog slept now. Finally, his breathing steady. Jack understood something then, that no training course had ever taught him. Protection wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about authority. It was about who you were willing to stand in front of when it mattered most. And the consequences of that choice would follow all of them from this day forward. The house felt different when Jack returned. Not quieter, not emptier, just aware. Late afternoon light filtered through the windows of the service home, pale and thin against the snow piled outside. The broken machine had been removed, the carpet cleaned. The air no longer smelled of burned wiring. On the surface, everything looked repaired. But Jack knew better. He moved slowly through the living room, holding his daughter against his chest. She slept peacefully now, unaware of how close the world had come to touching her. Jack paused beside the crib, resting a hand on its edge, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingers. This was where it happened. Not the impact, not the injury, the choice. At the hospital, Rex had finally fallen into a deep, medicated sleep. The veterinarian warned Jack not to expect a quick recovery. Months of rehab, uncertainty about returning to full K-9 duty. Jack had nodded, accepting every word without argument. For the first time, duty didn't feel like the priority. That evening, a message from K-9 Command waited on his phone. No accusations, no reprimands. Just a request for a formal statement, and a reminder that the footage had already circulated quietly among senior staff. Jack stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "I'll come in tomorrow with the video." Emily watched him from the doorway, her expression soft but searching. "Are you okay?" she asked. Jack let out a slow breath. "I don't know yet." They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Some truths were too heavy for immediate discussion. They needed space to settle. Later that night, after putting the baby down, Jack sat, alone, at the kitchen table. The house creaked gently around him. Snow tapped against the windows again. Steady. Patient. He opened the video on his phone. He watched Rex hear the sound first. He watched the hesitation. He watched the decision. Jack didn't flinch this time. What struck him now wasn't the violence of the moment, but the restraint. Rex never lunged blindly, never panicked, never acted out of chaos. He assessed, positioned, and acted only when there was no other option left. That was training. But choosing to absorb the impact, that wasn't. Jack closed the video and leaned back, rubbing his eyes. He thought about all the conversations he'd had with younger officers, about emotional distance, about staying sharp, about never letting feelings interfere with judgment. He wondered how many of those lessons had been incomplete. The next morning, Jack stood in a small conference room at the station. The K-9 supervisor, a risk management officer, a department attorney, They sat across from him. A tablet lay on the table between them. "We've reviewed the footage," the supervisor said. "Multiple times." Jack nodded. "So have I." The attorney folded her hands. "From a liability standpoint, this incident raises concerns: equipment storage, facility maintenance, residential safety protocols." Jack waited. "But," she continued, "it also clearly demonstrates intentional protective behavior by K9 Rex. There is no indication of aggression toward the child." The supervisor leaned forward. "Jack, I need to ask you something. Off the record." Jack met his eyes. "Okay." "Did Rex disobey any command that night?" Jack didn't hesitate. "No." "Did he violate any training standard?" "No." "Then what did he do?" Jack swallowed. "He chose." Silence filled the room. Finally, the supervisor nodded. "That's what we saw, too." No medals were discussed. No press releases. The department didn't want attention. They wanted clarity. And clarity, it turned out, was enough. When Jack returned home later that day, he noticed something he hadn't before: the absence. Rex wasn't there. The house felt larger without him, less anchored. Jack stood in the doorway of the living room, longer than necessary. His daughter slept in her carrier beside him. He imagined Rex's presence, watchful, steady, unspoken. For the first time, Jack felt the weight of trust, not as a risk, but as a responsibility. He understood now that some truths didn't need debate. They didn't need proof beyond what had already been shown. They simply needed to be acknowledged. And Jack Miller was finally ready to do that. Jack didn't remember sitting down. He only remembered the sound of his daughter breathing, steady, warm, against his chest, and the sudden realization that his hands were shaking. Not from cold, not from exhaustion, from collapse. He was back at the house again. Late evening settling in. The sky outside turning the same dull gray it always did before snow. Emily stood near the window, rocking gently. Her movements slow, careful, as if the world itself might crack if she moved too fast. Rex's absence filled every corner. Jack tried to tell himself this was normal, that dogs went to vets, that K9s were boarded during recovery, that this was temporary. But the logic didn't hold. The house had lost something essential. Not noise, not activity. Presence. Jack lowered himself onto the couch. He stared at the floor where Rex used to lie. The memory came without warning. Rex curled beside the crib, bleeding, still alert, still guarding. And that was when Jack broke. Not loudly, not all at once. His shoulders sagged first, then his breath hitched, sharp, uneven. He pressed his palm to his face, but it didn't stop the tears. They came anyway, hot, uncontrollable, humiliating. "I almost failed her," he said, his voice barely audible. Emily froze. Jack looked up at her, eyes red, jaw clenched. like he was holding back something far worse than tears. I was so focused on controlling the danger, he continued, that I didn't see who was actually standing between her and it. Emily crossed the room. She sat beside him. She didn't speak. She just placed her hand over his. I thought I was being strong, Jack said. I thought fear meant I cared more. His voice cracked. But all it did was blind me. Emily squeezed his hand gently. You didn't fail her, she said softly. You listened before it was too late. Jack shook his head. I didn't listen, he said. A camera did. That truth cut deeper than anything else. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet again, Jack stood alone in the nursery. The crib was empty for now. The baby sleeping in the bassinet in their room. But Jack found himself standing there anyway, staring at the bars. This was where Rex had stood. This was where Jack had doubted. He leaned forward, rested his forehead against the crib rail, and let the weight of it all press down. Years of policing had taught him how to compartmentalize, to lock fear away until it was useful. But this fear was different. This wasn't about danger on the streets. This was about the people and animals who trusted him. Jack remembered something his academy instructor once said. A good officer controls the scene. No one ever taught him how to step back and recognize when control wasn't the answer. The next morning, Jack drove to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Center alone. The building smelled of disinfectant and warm fur. Rex lay in a padded enclosure, his leg wrapped, his body thinner already, exhausted from surgery and pain medication. When Rex heard Jack's footsteps, his ears lifted. Jack knelt beside the enclosure slowly, as if approaching something sacred. Hey, he whispered. It's me. Rex's tail moved once. That was all it took. Jack pressed his forehead to the metal railing, tears slipping free again. I don't deserve you, he said, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life acting like I do. Rex breathed out, calm, steady, no judgment, no resentment, just acceptance. On the drive home, Jack understood something that would change how he lived from that day forward. Strength wasn't about eliminating fear. It was about recognizing when fear was lying to you. And sometimes, the bravest thing a man could do, especially a man trained to command, was to admit he had been wrong. That night, Jack filled out one last piece of paperwork. Not for the department, not for the city, for himself. He wrote a single sentence and taped it to the inside of a kitchen cabinet, where he'd see it every morning. Trust the ones who stay when they could walk away. Rex had stayed. Now, it was Jack's turn. The department never released the footage. There was no press conference, no public statement, no headlines about a heroic police dog, or a near tragedy narrowly avoided. The video was classified as internal evidence, filed, time-stamped, stored on a secure server, accessible to only a handful of people. But inside the building, everyone knew. Jack felt it the moment he walked into the station that morning. Conversations lowered. Chairs stopped creaking. A few officers nodded at him. Not the casual nods of routine, but something heavier. Respect, mixed with restraint. No one joked. No one asked questions they already knew the answers to. In the K9 briefing room, the lights were dimmed. The screen glowed as the footage played again, this time without commentary, without interruption. Just the quiet hum of the house, the lift rolling forward, Rex stepping in front of the crib. No one spoke. Jack stood at the back of the room, arms folded tight across his chest, feeling every second like a weight he deserved to carry. When the clip ended, the room stayed silent, longer than it needed to. Finally, the K9 supervisor cleared his throat. That dog made a call no handler could have ordered. A few officers shifted in their seats. He absorbed impact, another said quietly. On purpose. Jack swallowed. The risk management officer spoke next, voice careful. From a policy standpoint, this footage raises concerns. Residential equipment storage, electrical safeguards, liability exposure. No one disagreed. And from a moral standpoint, the supervisor asked. That was when Jack stepped forward. It shows intent, he said. His voice didn't shake. Not aggression, not unpredictability. Protection. The supervisor nodded slowly. That's our conclusion as well. The decision came without drama. The video would be locked. Rex's record amended. Extraordinary protective behavior under uncommanded circumstances. No disciplinary action. No forced retirement. No quiet removal from the unit. But there would be no ceremony either. Rex wasn't a symbol. He was a responsibility. Later that day, Jack sat alone in the report room, typing the final incident summary. He chose his words carefully, not to defend himself, not to justify fear, but to tell the truth, plainly. He didn't mention heroism. He didn't mention sacrifice. He wrote only what happened. K9 Rex assessed a mechanical threat and positioned himself between the hazard and an infant. He maintained protective posture after injury until the threat was neutralized. That was it. No adjectives, no emotion. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, realizing something that made his chest tighten. If the camera hadn't been running, this would have been written off as speculation, a close call, a fortunate outcome. Rex's choice would have been invisible. That afternoon, Jack visited Rex again at the rehabilitation center. The dog lay on a padded mat near a window, sunlight warming the fur along his back. When Jack entered, Rex lifted his head slightly. Jack smiled, for the first time in days. They saw it, he said softly. All of it. Rex blinked once, unimpressed. They locked the video away, Jack added. But it's on record now. What you did matters. Rex exhaled, slow, steady. On the drive home, Jack passed the service house and didn't turn in. He wasn't ready yet. Some places needed time to breathe before you could return to them. Instead, he parked by a quiet overlook, snow stretching out in pale fields beneath the fading sky. He thought about how many decisions were made every day based on fear. How often people mistook control for safety. He thought about a dog with no voice, no rank, no authority, only instinct, and how that instinct had done what rules alone could not. Jack understood now why the department chose silence. Some truths didn't need applause. They just needed to be honored and protected so they could never be erased. Rex came home on a gray afternoon, the kind where the sky hung low and the world felt muted, as if it were holding its breath. Jack carried him inside carefully, every step measured. The vet had warned him, no stairs, no sudden movements, no excitement. Rex's leg was wrapped in clean white bandages, his body thinner, his movements slower. He was no longer the powerful K9 who could clear a room in seconds. But the house reacted to him anyway. The moment Rex crossed the threshold, something settled. The air felt warmer. The silence softened. Emily noticed it first. She paused in the kitchen doorway, watching Rex lower himself onto the rug with a quiet sigh, his back facing the crib, his body angled just enough to block the open space beyond. He hadn't been told to do that. Jack felt a tightening in his chest. The baby stirred, letting out a small sound that barely counted as a cry. Rex's ears lifted instinctively, though his eyes remained half-closed. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. That night, Jack slept for the first time in weeks. Not deeply, not without dreams, but without the constant jolt of fear that had been living under his skin. He woke once, just after midnight, heart racing out of habit. He listened. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Then he heard it, the soft rhythm of breathing. Two of them, one small, one steady and familiar. Jack rolled onto his side and looked toward the nursery doorway. Rex lay just outside it. Not inside. Not crowding. Just there. Jack stayed awake for a long time after that, watching the faint rise and fall of Rex's chest in the dim light. He thought about everything that had changed, about how close he'd come to dismantling the one thing that had been holding his family together. Emily joined him at the doorway a little later, her robe pulled tight around her shoulders. "He won't come in," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "He knows his place." Emily smiled faintly. "He always did." Days passed, then weeks. Rex's recovery was slow. Physical therapy appointments filled Jack's calendar, alongside patrol shifts and pediatric checkups. The vet talked about muscle memory, healing timelines, long-term outcomes. Jack listened, but he no longer asked the question that once would have mattered most. Will he ever work again? It didn't matter. Rex's job had changed. In the afternoons, Jack sat on the floor, while his daughter lay on a blanket nearby, gurgling at nothing in particular. Rex stayed within reach, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to miss anything. When delivery trucks passed outside, or unfamiliar footsteps approached the house, Rex lifted his head, alert, calm. Jack found himself trusting that response more than any home security system he could have installed. Cameras had shown him the truth once. Rex showed it every day. One evening, as Jack filled out paperwork at the kitchen table, insurance forms, medical bills, the kind of adult responsibilities that came after near disaster, he glanced up and saw something that stopped him cold. His daughter had rolled closer to Rex, not enough to touch him, just enough to feel the warmth. Rex noticed. He shifted slightly, adjusting his position so she was sheltered without being restrained. He didn't look at Jack. He didn't seek approval. Jack closed his eyes. This wasn't training. This was trust. Emily watched from across the room, her hand covering her mouth. "He's still working," she said softly. Jack nodded. "Just not for the department." That night, Jack added another line beneath the one taped inside the cabinet. He wrote slowly, carefully, as if the words needed to be earned. Protection doesn't retire. Rex lay nearby, eyes half closed, ears relaxed for once. The house no longer felt like a place where something terrible had almost happened. It felt like a place where something right had stayed.